Yeah, so I'm Ryan Dickie. I think I know a lot of the people in the room. Most have probably heard me talk a little bit about the Family Forest Number project, so I'm not going to do a big introduction for that one. I just want to give like a little anecdotal one for Lori's presentation before. We've got a farm and Woodlot property in Stewiacke. We were there last summer with my 5-year-old and saw a bat flying around at nighttime. He wanted to know why the bird was out flying around. I said, nobody, that's a bat out. He said, bats aren't real dead. He thought they were just a Halloween decoration. Same as like, yeah, so it's you know, worry a little bit. The younger generation's not going to get the joy of chasing a bat around the house at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get it out of there, right? So anyway, so what I'm here to talk about today is like through our ecological forestry research project, we've kind of identified gaps that we see maybe in planning, both for timber management stuff, but also think a little bit more about wildlife and everything else like that too. The first comment up there is ecological forestry considers all parts of the forested ecosystem, not just the trees, so birds are definitely a big part of that. There's a lot of regulations around birds, maybe not always very heavily enforced, but we've got things like the Wildlife Act, Species at Risk Act, and then the big one for us is the Migratory Bird Convention Act. That's a federal one. Basically regulates that you can't knowingly just destroy or disturb bird nests during nesting season. So there was some research in the past that said, you know, forest harvesting is responsible for destruction of between 18,000 and almost 160,000 bird nests per year in Nova Scotia. Obviously, that's a huge range. It just depends on how they look at it. It's almost impossible to find bird nests in the woods. You almost never even know if or when you've destroyed one. So, but either way, you know, like nobody's come after us for any of this type of stuff, but we do know about it, and so we just have to find a way to do better. Our approach is kind of that, you know, it's tough to ask contractors to shut down right through bird season. I know there's some groups and some landowners that have a hard and fast rule, say no, we're going to do a singing season. That's actually, you know, it's good for some folks to be able to do that. My reasoning behind wanting to do this type of work is that, you know, we could say we're not going to do any work in the summertime, but I've got plenty of places that are wet. We don't get the winters that we used to anymore to go in and work those in frozen ground, so sometimes you need to do your harvesting in the summer. And also, if we shut down, my contractors aren't going to stop working, so they're just going to go work somewhere else. So the option's kind of, you know, work with us. We'll do a bunch of research, do everything we can to try and mitigate any amount of damage that we have with the birds versus, you know, maybe clear cut a few hundred acres right through the summertime. So typical nesting season for birds, as you can see. So the chart there is actually from Birds Canada. They have a great tool that you can go in and plug a bunch of different species in. It'll kind of give you a nesting calendar for when they start and when they finish. Some species like top one would be northern goshawks. Most of the birds of prey, you know, they'd be probably on eggs. They may actually have chicks by now even. Versus things like evening grosbeaks start more mid-May right through the summer. But in general, what we say for a nesting season is mid-May through mid-August, and June and July are kind of like the main. That's when the most nesting behavior and will happen. So. Some of these tools, like we actually use these, like as we do our planning work and stuff, we kind of start to build a bit of a bird nest. We use Merlin all the time. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with that one. It helps to be able to plug all the different species we have for those sites into these ones and see, you know, especially as we get later in the summer, some of those birds may be there, but they're probably not nesting anymore. So this was a whole bunch of words. I don't expect anyone to read this, but we have a bit of a 5-step protocol. It's actually a little bit appropriate that Lori was here beforehand. We developed this, I should have prefaced this one by saying I'm not a bird expert, I'm just a very amateur birder. By the end of the summer, I know most of them by sight and sound, and then I forget all of them in the wintertime, so like right now I'm trying to relearn them again. But we worked a lot with Abby, with MTRI, to develop this. We've had some help and input from Cindy Stacers, an ornithologist with Dalhousie, and then also Maggie Davison, who's now with MTRI, worked with us last summer, and she actually did a lot of the legwork on this type of stuff. So the first step for us within our bird protocol, and this is actually, the first step is protocol for all of our harvest sites. we use MTRI, they have access to better data around like locations of species at risk and everything. So for all the sites that we're going to do harvesting on, we just do a desktop exercise where I'll send a shapefile of the boundaries of the woodlot, or even just the property ID number to MTRI, and they're able to look it up and compare how close any species at risk are to the woodlot. So sometimes, pretty rarely we have any directly on the lot, but there's been a few times where they're close by, and then once we know that species is there, we can kind of look at the area that we're thinking about harvesting and say, okay, well, is this an appropriate area for those species? If it is, maybe we have to defer the site or figure out some way to adapt it. So if possible, we do our PTA, stands for pre-treatment assessment. That's where I actually go walk around the woods, measure all the trees and everything else. I've got some sites that I'd like to get out to, but put them off. We'll start getting on those ones now that we're kind of into the bird season, especially if we can do them in June and July and stuff. We want to do them as close to the harvest as we possibly can, while still leaving enough room that we're not in a rush to get everything planned before the harvester arrives. But we'll do our pre-treatment assessments during nesting season if we can. It doesn't always work out that way. Mostly so we can actually, like I say, a lot of foresters don't know the bird species that well, but we use Merlin. I also just ordered a thing, it's called a bird weather puck. It's one that you can just wear, it records all the time, and it's actually has GPS in it, so it can show you when it records a bird song, exactly where you were in the woodlot too. Just kind of with the hope that, if there is a rare species there, we can rule that site out for a summer harvest right away. We don't have to go through the whole process of everything else we do for the birds. So if we decide, step 3, we would decide that, yeah, we think we can try and go ahead with this harvest during the summertime. We'll actually go out and we deploy ARUs, or just automatic recording units. And so what they do is they turn on for 4 hours in the morning for the dawn course, which is when you'll actually hear the most bird song, and then again for 2 hours in the evening, just at dusk. And they just record it intermittently. Birds that they'll pick up about 100-meter radius. It depends on the stand that you're in. If you get in, like a single-age spruce stand, there's not much for understory or anything. It can pick them up further away versus a multi-age stand, lots of regeneration in different cohorts of trees. Maybe not quite even getting out to that 100 meters with those. So we put them out for at least 2 weeks, pull them down, pull the SD cards out, and we actually run the data through a program called BirdNet, which I think is what Merlin is based on. So it just goes through and it automatically identifies the species that it's here's calling. It's not perfect. It gives you a bit of a confidence rating. And for us, like I'll have a 2-week recording and get 50,000 instances of picking up black-cap chickadees. Like you just expect they're going to be there, right? So we don't worry about too much of those. But like once we pull it down, I sort it by species and everything else. And then we can start to look, say, okay, well, there's just some rare species on there that maybe I would be concerned about. I'll tell you, like you can't always trust it. There was one woodlot we had last year that it picked up a whole bunch of American bitterns. If anybody knows an American bittern, they're a wetland species, and their call almost sounds like a drop of water. And I was like, why is it picking them up? And it was like 98% confidence. What it ended up was just where this one ARU was set up, every time it rained, the water would drop right on top of it, and that's what it was picking up every time. Like it made no sense. There was no chance that those birds were there, but it takes some time. You have to rule them out a lot with those ones. Sometimes the other thing, especially at this time of year, what will happen is we'll get a bird confirmed that it's there, but you only pick it up on like 1 or 2 days. Sometimes it doesn't really make sense. Like the stand that we're working in doesn't fit what their nesting habitat is, so we can kind of rule those out as, they're just passing by. Generally speaking, once birds get to their nesting area, that's kind of where they'll stay right through the summer, but especially early in the year, and they all migrate at different times. Sometimes you just pick up passersby, but it tells me exactly what time we heard them calling and the date and everything, so like we're looking for more where it's consistent. We see that bird always there. So then step 4, like I said, we sort them. We use the S rank, which is from the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Center. They give a ranking, so basically S5 birds are stable species. That would be like your black-cap chickadees. S1s are essentially your species of risk birds. And for the first iteration of our protocol, what we had said was any S1, which would be the at risk, and then 2 and 3 are I can't remember what the actual term is for them, but either at risk, uncommon birds, or especially the S3s are for some species like eastern wood peaveys, a great example. I hear them everywhere all the time. There's actually a lot of eastern wood peaveys around, but if you look at historical data, they think they've declined by like 70% since the 1970s. So that's where the concern comes for those birds. So, like I said, in our first iteration, if we had an S1 through an S3 bird, we just said automatic deferral. We're not operating that site. It just gets moved to outside the nesting window. And then for step 5, if we decided that we could go ahead with that site, we make sure the landowner knows. There's generally a lot of interest from landowners because I can give you a full list of all the different species that we heard on the site. We'll talk to the contractors. We're not done with this project, so right now I'm starting to develop some info cards for, not for every species, but the ones that we may be a little bit more concerned about, just so that the contractors, I might ask them to watch for a certain species, and they can, gives them an idea where they may nest, if they're ground nesters, if they nest way up in the canopy or anything else. So. Some of the other considerations, so harvest type, we think at least has a big influence. In general for us, what we've said, and this doesn't always work out because you have to balance this stuff with operational constraints and everything too. I have a few sites where we're going to do multiple harvests this summer. One is a gap, one would be more like a continuous cover, like a thinning or an irregular shelter wood. But in general, if we can, we prefer to only do gap-based harvesting in the summertime, just because it's more of it has a really large effect, but just on the immediate area where the gaps are. If you can see on the right, that would be an irregular gap shelter wood. So it's a big effect on the gaps. You can take most of the trees, but then in the rest of the area, which would be about 2/3 of that site, other than the trails, we haven't really done anything. So in those areas, there's a better chance that, obviously there's going to be noise disturbance for machinery and everything, but we're not actually cutting trees in those areas. Versus you can see on the left, that would be more like a continuous cover shelter wood or a commercial thinning, something like that. In those ones, you've essentially touched the entire area. And how we landed on that one was essentially, we've all done some training on how to identify nesting bird areas. Like I said, it's almost impossible to find bird nests, but a lot of times if you're patient and quiet, you'll see birds carrying nesting material this time of year. A little bit later in the summer when they may have chicks, you'll see birds going with a whole bunch of insects in their mouth. You can kind of assume that what they're doing is taking those back to a nest, so then we'll just kind of watch them, see where they're going. And once you see them kind of flying into the same area every time, I'm not going to go look for the nest because I don't want to disturb them. We can just assume that there's a nest there. Maybe we would buffer that area to the harvest. Gaps. The other big one, when we tried this, we did a few of each different harvest type. I feel really confident in the gap. Not 100%, but the gaps would be maybe the size of this room. And I can kind of go and I'll sit in the middle and I turn my Merlin on, I'm listening for birds, and I can watch around and see most of the gap area, and I'll stay there for 20 minutes or something like that and watch bird activity. Versus in the continuous cover one, there's just no effective way for me to walk around and see that entire area. So in the gaps, I have pretty good confidence. When I did the few with the continuous cover, I don't have a lot of confidence that they're trying to visually confirm whether or not there's bird species. Very, very low confidence rating in those ones. Some technology, the photo on the top left is actually one of our ARUs that we deployed. I didn't bring any with me, but they're just it's just a computer chip inside a waterproof case. It just gets strapped onto the tree. Bird net is what we use for trying to sort through and identify, or at least initially identify all the species there. The other green one, that's called a bird weather puck. Those are fairly common. They're, I think, $400 or something like that. A lot of landowners like them because you can set them out on your back deck. They actually build little huts for them that you can put them in. They can be out in the rain and everything. Our hope is that I can wear it all day and try and identify bird species. I'm a little bit worried about if I wear one all day and somebody else has to listen to it, what kind of stupid things are going to hear me say while I'm recording for birds, because I tend to talk to myself in the woods. So, obviously Merlin, that's a fun one. It's a free app. You can use it on your smartphone. Raven Light's a little bit like BirdNet. It doesn't actually identify anything, but we use that one. It's a lot easier to find the right spot in the recordings using that one. I can kind of put everything together. It also gives you a chance to see, I never remember the name for what it is, but when the birds call, there's a pattern you can see on it. I'm not good enough to do it, but some folks that do this all the time, they can actually kind of pick out the bird calling without necessarily hearing it. So, and then the ArcGIS, the Survey 123, that's what we use for all of our planning. So when I do my pre-treatment assessments, anything else within the project, that's how we collect our data. But we actually have a bird form. So like every time I do a pre-treatment assessment point, I have a bird form there too, where I can both upload my Merlin recording. We do at least a 2-minute recording every time, so I can upload that. And sometimes Merlin, like, it really doesn't get that far out, and sometimes I'll hear something further off, so I can actually add other species that Merlin didn't pick up. So. Don't know if I hit there. Oh. So these maps never show up all that great, but this is just an example of how we would put them out. So I picked the wrong graphic. The little white spots are meant to show where, like, the intended area for the birds. I didn't even realize until afterwards. I just typed bird in and picked the first one I saw, and then I realized it's actually like a bullseye on it, so it's like a hunting. We're definitely not hunting birds out there or anything, but this is how we make maps. So obviously I want to get them well distributed. We try and make sure we're, roughly in the center of the harvest area. We don't want to get a bunch of influence from outside of where we're working, especially if it's like a vastly different stand type or anything. It doesn't always work out great that way, but so that's how we put them out. And we actually go out in the field, deploy the ARUs. If you ever want to do this type of stuff, make absolutely sure you take really good GPS points for where the ARUs are, because I've spent 4 hours walking around because I forgot to mark it on my map, and I know roughly where it is, but it takes a while to find a little green puck on the side of a tree in the forest. So. Usually, we don't know if this works or not. The other thing we do is we try and orient the ARU so it's pointed more towards the middle. Again, just trying to pick up bird song from within that harvest area instead of coming from the outside. So. Worked perfect at first. I don't know if I hit it or not.
Hot and cold.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can change it for me. Great. Oh, back one there. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is just a little bit about our field practice. So we, like I said, we use a combination of visual and audio. I wear a pair of binoculars all the time when I'm in the woods. Even Vortex makes a really nice binocular run. Sometimes, wearing a big pair of binoculars I carry 50 pounds of field gear with me, so anytime you can cut some weight, it's good. Use Merlin or the pucks. We always document everything that's there. A big one for me, this is like a bit of an anecdotal thing. Like I spent most of my career in the woods working as a silviculture contractor. So one of the things I always figured out, and this is partially why I was really interested in this, because not many times, but there's been a few times around the brush saw, I cut a tree and then realized there's a nest. I've never cut one with the tree in it, but I've cut trees and then you expose the nest. So, spend 10 minutes trying to build a brush pile back around it and stuff. But one of the big ones I always figured out is birds tend to not reuse. Most birds don't reuse their nest, but some species, like a robin is probably the best example. They don't reuse that nest, but when you find one and you start to look around, you'll find a 3-year-old nest and a 2-year-old nest and then the nest that they're in too. So. Robins are generally easy if it shuts off and listen. They'll tell you that they can get pretty pissed off at you if you're too close. So, and then some of the other things we do, like try and carry field cards. I actually have like a nest ID book and everything. I try and carry with me when I'm in the woods and understanding your regulations. The regulations are a little bit less for the migratory birds, but more for hawks and stuff. So. This is in a stand that, as soon as I walked into it, because I'd taken the biodiversity course with Mark Paulsifer, talked to, read bird stuff, everything else. I said, oh, geez, this would be a great spot for a goshawk, which they get one of the biggest protections for nests. And I was there for 5 minutes and found a goshawk nest. So it's, the more you can, like, it's impossible to know everything in the woods. You can only be an expert at one thing, I think. But the more you can at least be familiar with it, the biggest one for us is always knowing where to go find the information that you need. So that's been the best part with MTRI for us, is I can pick the phone up and call heavy all the time. So some of our results so far, so like I said, we said S1 through 3 species, we're going to stop everything every time. Last year we surveyed 14 sites and I only could have harvested one of them, and then we didn't do it because of the fire regulations anyway. So it was a little bit strict, and like I said, especially with the S3 species, something we're looking at for this year is like, is there ways that we can adapt them? I think probably for the summer we're going to look at bigger harvest sites, so that because we know where the ARUs are, and if we only pick bird up on like one up in the northeast corner or something, we may just be able to buffer that out and still go ahead with the harvest. We don't know for sure what we're going to do. This is just kind of like this is just a starting point. Hopefully this will evolve over the years. But yeah, the S3 birds are that's the eastern wood pewee there. They're kind of the bane of my existence sometimes. So. So this is just examples of a whole bunch of different S3 birds, like common nighthawks, some of the different, the top right one was supposed to be a boreal chickadee, but I grabbed the wrong one, I think, like bluebirds. I think that's eastern phoebe in the top middle there. So they're you know, a lot of the S3 birds are mostly just because they've experienced population decline, not because they're rare. So try and figure something out. So yeah, like I've kind of touched on all these ones. The S1 and S2 birds, unless we can prove that they're just in a little corner, they're still going to end up being an automatic deferral. We won't work in those sites. They're too rare of a species to risk anything. The S3 birds, obviously, we're going to try and adapt the harbor sites, and like we have a focus on the S1 through 3 birds, but all of the migratory birds are protected under this. So if the chickadees are there, I have to understand where they may be nesting and be watching for them too. Like we don't only watch for the rare ones. It's all birds within the sites. And then yeah, the other one is, and I'm probably not skilled enough. Hopefully we'll do some more research on this in the future. But better assessment of suitable habitat for each birds and understanding, you know, before we even think about harvesting. What sites will be good ones in the future, and where to focus our summer harvesting. So some of the training we've done, put a few of these up, especially so the top left one is Cornell Birds, kind of the preeminent university in the States. For any landowners that are interested in this, they run a whole bunch of small, like couple hour long, it's just self-directed time birding courses that you know, they generally are kind of in like the $40 to $80 range and stuff. And the nice part about those, I've done a whole bunch of them. I think I've got some value out of them. And it's a lifelong registration, so you can go back and redo that course as many times as you want to. Like I said, our entire staff, it's an avian nest sweep. It's through the Natural Resource Training Group. So these were just online ones, but it was a 2-day training thing. A lot of it focused around like they really enforce these regulations on pipelines and that type of stuff out west, so it was good training there. And then the Stokes Field Guide Bird Song, that's personal training. If you ever drive with me this time of year, like I said, I forget all my bird species, so I'm trying to remember them again. You can customize a list, and that's all you'll hear in my car when I'm driving around this time of year is just different bird calls. It'll just says the name of the bird, hear a few different calls, on to the next one. So I got that from John Brazier, who used to be a DNR biologist. So. Costs can be expensive to do this stuff. The ARUs are around $175 each. If you bulk buy, it can bring them down a little bit. You know, it takes half a day at least. We base our fuel costs on at least $450 for a whole day. So for even just a small harvest, if you add everything up, you're looking at, you know, a minimum of $900 or $1,000 to get this type of stuff done. So. And then have to factor in things like mileage and stuff too. And we haven't looked a lot at the cost stuff because we're just trying to figure out how to do this. But I just figured I'd put it up there because, you know, folks are interested in this, and it's got to get paid for somehow. So, like I said, some future projects, some things are ongoing, so developing field cars, especially for the S1 through 3 species. I'd love to have a silviculture manual for Nova Scotia birds. It's actually something like the Audubon. There's different chapters for every state in America. You can see like Forestry for Maine birds. They've got them for most of the eastern states, starting to do the western ones. Another one that Maine did is they have a focus species forestry, so they kind of pick out, you know, list of 20 bird species, if you understand their habitat and protect that habitat or work to enhance it when you're in their area, you'll kind of work on habitat for most bird species. So using some of that, like see everything, we use our forest ecosystem classification. So for all our sites, we're starting to build at least the start of a database where we know what birds are on different sites. It'd be great with long-term research if you can kind of tie that back to say, okay, well, this is where I'm going to work, and look at the research for those sites from, you know, past bird surveys. Groups like Port Hawkesbury Paper, you're starting to use LiDAR to try and pick out, you know, suitable habitat for some of the bird species. For them, a big one would be like Canada warblers, looking at like a little bit wetter coniferous or mixed wood sites, and whether using the LiDAR if the habitat is suitable there. And then eventually also like to do, you know, birding for foresters course, where we actually get some folks out to actually train them, because that's one of the big ones. You know, we definitely don't learn anything like this in forestry school. So. Yeah.
Questions for Ron?